If you've been on YouTube lately, you might be looking for reclamation algorithm guides, but the most you're gonna see, by and large, is how to not actually play the game. And I won't stand for this. My name is Dr. Socrates, and I, needless to say, am a reclamation algorithm veteran. I've gotten all 3 endings with the original event, Fire Within the Sand, got a high score of 16,000 points, and what's more, my base at the end of the event was, needless to say, amazing. The thing is, it didn't happen overnight, and it just took a lot of playing and playtime to figure things out. And unfortunately, the game doesn't really do a very good job of teaching you the subtleties or having you discover these subtleties on your own. So I'm going to make a different kind of guide. This isn't going to be the guide where you just deploy units here or take this unit and just use it on everything. We really do have to explore all of the different types of units in Arknights by and large, and this game mode rewards having a diverse operator roster more than ever. So unfortunately, if you're here for just a quick solution, this isn't it. Reclamation Algorithm is meant to be taken a lot more slowly, but in return, you get some of the most satisfying strategy gameplay that you'll ever get in Arknights, and I stand by this. And so, if you're willing to put up with a little bit of talking, a little bit of reading, and a little bit of decision making, I'm here to provide guidance on how to actually play Reclamation Algorithm. Now, since Fire Within the Sand was a long time ago and Tales Within the Sand introduces a lot of new changes, this video right here is going to be kind of a brief overview of what can carry over in terms of conventional wisdom in Reclamation Algorithm, plus some of the first impressions and initial major changes that I've noticed as I've played it for the launch day. I'm going to be continuing to play Reclamation Algorithm on my Twitch channel, so drop me a follow at Dr. Socrates on Twitch if you want to see me explore this new game mode live and maybe even find out some new quirks and new tricks in Tales Within the Sand. For now, though, let's start with the basics and some of the major changes that are easily noticeable. For starters, Reclamation Algorithm is now a long-term progression game mode that you can wipe a save and restart a run, but runs are now much longer and are, I guess, theoretically infinite. Again, this is in stark contrast to the 12-day limit of the original Reclamation Algorithm, in which once you lasted out 12 days and defeated the boss wave at the end, that would end the run, and then you would carry over your base, your gold pile, and the amount of items that you were allowed for trans-regional communication. This, needless to say, changes the metagame a lot. Progression is now gated in 3-day increments, so every 3 days you are going to get your score calculated, and this determines how many tech tree points you'll receive and also how much rewards points you'll receive for the shop. 3 days also happens to be an interval where most raids will spawn, so you'll have to fend off at least one incoming raid every score period. So to go about doing this, the objectives here are to gather food so that you can field your operators on more missions, gather building resources so that you can build and fortify defenses and more tools to get even more resources with, and then to fend off the raid using the operators that you have available, whether that be in a field that you have fortified or in your actual base. You will lose the run if your base is destroyed, or if you retreat during a raid on your base. Alternatively, if you just want to forfeit the run, the game allows you to wipe your save and get back all of the tech tree points that you invested, basically serving as a full tech tree reset at the cost of everything in your base, all of your resources, everything that you have on hand. It's going to be a fresh map and a new run. However, if you do face defeat out there, not to worry, every 3 days when the score is calculated, the game is also saved. So, if you feel like you just wanted a second shot at it and you know that you have enough resources and operators to defend successfully, then you are free to reload the save and try again. Certain things might be reseeded, but by and large the RNG should still be the same. And the map now is actually bigger than it was from Fire Within the Sand. The map now has 5 distinct regions, each with its own weather climate, And you'll also be subject to seasonal effects as the days rack up. You'll initially start in a neutral season so that, nothing funky is going on and you can get your feet wet without too much risk. First, let's talk team building. Before we even get into operator choices, it's important to know how the food system works. You can only deploy operators if you have at least 2 cartons of energy drinks available for your operators to consume. This includes base defense missions, so please don't be caught without food on a crucial defense mission day. Each operator is limited to 1 deployment on a given mission per day. There is no more stamina stacking as it was in Fire Within the Sand, where you could feed them nutrient juice on different days, just 10 points apiece, and rack up charges so that you could use them repeatedly on the same day. This is no longer the case. You will now have to field more squads, kind of like interlocking competition. The food values, though, are roughly the same, so 10 points per operator is roughly the conversion rate, but this is now skewed because every deployment costs at least 2 energy cartons, and then if you choose to deploy 12 operators instead, it will cost 3. Anywhere in between 6 and 12 doesn't change the food cost, so it's up to you whether or not you want to render more operators unavailable or try to really save on your good operators and go below the team building limit. And again, even though buff food is still in the game, this does not reward your operator with an additional chance to deploy. It's only through nutrient juice are operators able to go out onto the field. Food buffs are still relevant though, and depending on your operator choices, some operators receive a significant buff from certain types of food. So you'll want to be looking for ingredients the entire game because these buffs aren't permanent, and some of the highest tier buffs in the game can really make operators shine and really aid you in terms of clearing maps with less operators out on the field, and thus more operators available for other things. Okay, now assuming you have enough food to be going out and deploying your operators, who should you pick? It really depends on what you're doing. In a lot of the maps in Reclamation Algorithm, it's not going to be so much tower defense as it is tower offense. The resource gathering maps and hunting maps are both types of maps where you don't have a protection objective. You won't necessarily need to bunker down and defend one spot. If anything, these maps are huge, and you're going to be benefiting a lot from operators that can redeploy very fast. And if you don't have fast redeploy operators, you're going to need a lot more operators per team to get the job done, since you're going to be juggling redeployments if your target or your quarry or the resources are in a different spot of the map where you set up. Let's start with hunting maps. Hunting is pretty straightforward. There are enemy units on the map, some of them happen to be worth a little bit of meat, and by and large you just try to kill them. A lot of prey will start to scamper away as you attack them, but some prey will actually put up a fight, and you'll need some operators that are good at dishing out damage while taking it in return. Oh, and by the way, you are on a time limit, so making sure that you can get your job done fast and efficiently is key. With that in mind, let's start with the Vanguard class. I want to highlight Agent Vanguards specifically. This is a subclass that is very, very strong in Reclamation Algorithm because they kind of do multiple jobs at once. They are fast redeploy operators, so they're not as fast as, say, Executor Specialists, but they will regenerate their deployment cooldown a lot faster than most, which means that they can get around the map very, very quickly, and they're also very cheap to deploy, roughly around 10 DP base cost. As of recording, there are only 3 Agent Vanguards in the game as of the moment, so they might be a little bit hard to get, but if you do get them in your headhunting, get them fighting fit immediately, as they will be one of the most versatile classes of operators that you will use in Reclamation Algorithm. When a map starts, you're going to want to deploy them immediately on anything that they can hit so that they can use their skills to generate DP. Most of their kits generate DP on attack, so try not to get them killed. You should be able to make use of that range, and they can hit aerial units if need be. Inez is obviously going to be best in class here, as she has a lot of different perks that make her especially good as a Vanguard. Camo detection, she has crowd control. She basically does it all, and you should be using her on the most difficult of hunting maps whenever possible. And if you want to use other agents on that map, that's fine too. Just be sure not to over deploy if you want to do something else during that day. Remember, you only get one deployment per day, so you're going to want to assemble an A team and a B team depending on what it is you're doing that day, and try not to overlap the operators that you take on one mission that you would want to take on the other. Another class that's good on hunting missions, unsurprisingly, are the fast redeploy executor specialists. So, the meta definers, Texas Alter, Yato Alter, and the like. Now, in my first 5 hours of playing this mode, I've noticed that the Foul Beasts in particular have a design that discourages the use of Texas Alter and Yato Alter in the form of A, being flyers, and B, being invulnerable for a few seconds when they take damage, and then followed up by a short cooldown period afterwards. So this really discourages just taking those executors. They'll still be really, really good for cleaning up messes and going to different parts of the map, just like Agent Vanguards. You're going to want to be using them for getting treasure chests that are out of reach and, other stuff like that. But this brings me to the next class recommendation that I have, and that's going to be Besiegers. Besiegers in general have a really long range attack pattern, and this reveals a lot of different tiles while keeping them in relative safety away from enemy patrols, and this means that they can take out hunting targets without getting damaged themselves, or, with less maintenance. There's going to be a lot of different things in Reclamation Algorithm that might make hunting a little bit difficult in terms of keeping your operators alive. It wouldn't be the first time where I've lost a sniper or two to acid rain because I forgot to take someone who could heal them. And also, because the maps are so large, it is very, very nice to have a large attack range so that when your quarry flees out of attack range, you're not kept scrambling to deploy another operator in high ground that may or may not be there. And so this is why I really like classes like the Besieger and also the Deadeye. The Deadeye is also really nice in terms of their vision radius. And some specific operators I'd like to recommend. Totter is really cheap for a Besieger and has the added bonus of being able to target camouflaged enemies. So he's really, really good in terms of just kind of getting stuff on the board. Tifon, of course, is probably your best in slot Besieger. The crowd control is going to be really handy for those fleeing targets. And in general, she just deals a lot of damage. And her skill 2 only needs 2 activations. And this is something I'm going to touch on here. You can get really crazy with the micromanagement in Reclamation Algorithm, but you only have so much time to be fuddling around with skills, and it's better to have your skills proc automatically, but instead of missing the timing and ruining what could otherwise be a perfect run. So I put a lot more value into auto-triggering skill 1 skills depending on the operator because of this fact that I'm not going to be able to micromanage everything. And generally speaking, it's just nice to have stuff that works right out of the box. You don't really have to mess around with it. I did mention the Deadeye class earlier, and I would also like to give special mention to Luna Cub here. She gets innate camouflage, and if you use her skill, her damage actually picks up a little bit, but it comes at the risk of losing her camouflage. Skill 1's probably not worth it, but skill 2, if you have enough enemies that are weaker, you can kind of keep up a camouflage chain and keep her safe from most of the harms that befall a lot of hunting operators. Plus, if nothing else, she gives really good vision, and I'd recommend her to be at least promoted to E1 so that you can gain the passive and see the vision range as a result. She makes for a really, really good scout tower on demand. If you have Fartooth, she's also another really good class member here for the Deadeyes. Fartooth in particular, you're gonna not actually be using the S3 unless you're using her for base defense. The infinite range is nice, but it's gimmicky at best, and again, you're gonna need to be luring enemies into the range, which you can do. Enemies will generally take aggro if they're just milling about if they see someone in attack range. and they will start pathing towards tiles with operators on them if they can see them or are getting attacked by them. But generally speaking, you're actually going to want to run S2 on Fartooth instead, because you can control where she's attacking based on who you are blocking with. The last special class that I would like to highlight for hunters are Ambusher Specialists. As of recording, there are 4: Mizuki, Kirara, Ethan, and of course Manticore. Unfortunately, Manticore doesn't retain her token effect from Fire Within the Sand as far as I know, so no more 100 plus attack speed Manticore, sad days, but she still offers pretty good passive effects in the movement slow, which again, if your quarry is running all over the place, it's going to be useful to have the extra crowd control. This class in general is pretty safe from a lot of different kinds of enemy types. Since they have no block, they don't really take damage from blocked enemies bashing on them. You will have to look out for enemies with reflect damage though, so in that case take someone who's a little bit sturdier like Kirara to hopefully shrug off the damage or at least outlast them. And since they have 9 tiles of attack range and are on low ground, they're pretty versatile where you can set them up, and they will provide pretty good vision even without some of the crucial tech tree vision upgrades, since again their attack range provides them with a pretty good zone of vision around them. As far as other like map to map specific recommendations go, that'll be for a future video. Again, I need to be playing this new mode and kind of formulating my best opinions on what to take on what map here, but in general, you should be able to see the enemies before you deploy, and so taking units that can either counter them or at least resist them a lot is going to be key. And also take a look at the map as well. You have full vision of what the tiles are going to be like, you just don't know where the random spawns are going to be, and so start thinking about where you might be placing your operators in advance. The high ground tiles are very, very important to manage correctly, so laying down besiegers or medics to keep your operators alive is going to be a very important part of planning for each deployment. And of course, if push comes to shove, you can use resources to build your own tiles wherever you want that is deployable on the map, so keep that in mind as well. It's once you get to a point where wood is not really much of a concern, use that extra 5 wood, put down that high ground tile in an impactful spot, and you're going to see a lot of good stuff come your way as a result. As the old saying goes, you gotta spend money to make money, and in this case, the resource economy should be able to provide for you. So, now you've hunted, you've got food for days, let's move on to resource maps. Resource maps have 2 components. One is going to be dealing enough damage to the actual resources that you're mining to harvest them, and then the second part is actually harvesting them. Now from the tutorial, you'll know that you can deploy operators next to a harvested resource to collect them, but they can only carry as much as their block count will allow. Now, if you boost a block count on an operator, they can carry more, but if it returns to, say, an unboosted state, it's not like you can repeatedly boost and unboost the block count to harvest even more resources. The only operator capable of doing something like that is Kestrel, and she is the mode-exclusive welfare operator reward, and is well worth building as a result, because every time she procs her skill, whether that's the auto-trigger skill 1, which is nice, or the arguably more efficient skill 2, she will send all of the resources that she's carrying directly to the inventory, and so she's one of the few exceptions that can actually harvest resources in an efficient manner. It's important to mention that you must deploy operators to collect resources. You cannot deploy summons, you cannot deploy devices to collect resources other than the drone hubs, which we'll get to that. For now, let's just focus on recommendations for resource maps in terms of operators that can haul resources or deal a lot of damage to resources. For starters, resources are either going to be kind of clumped together in adjacent tiles, or they're going to be kind of spread out and in little nooks and crannies. So depending on the map, you're going to be either taking some AoE operators such as artillerymen, Fiametta works well, Meteorite as well, since they'll just be constantly attacking it. You could take Fortress Defenders as well, so Horn and Fire Whistle are two of my favorites on a particular map to just basically bombard the tree line AFK, and that's reducing the micromanagement that I have to do. Which, speaking of which, some of the big, high, not really burst, but sustained damage operators that have manual skills, we're talking Ayafyala, Silverash, Winar, even Surtur. Those are really strong picks for these maps if you can field them, because they will deal a lot of damage very quickly, and this leaves a lot of room for your drone hubs or your other operators to basically pick up the pieces after they're done. If you're chopping trees, I would recommend towards Winar and Silverash, because they deal mainly physical damage. I know Winar does have a true damage aspect component of his skill, and so you might take him for the more sturdier resources like rocks and iron, but when it comes to those, I recommend taking arts damage operators like Ayafyala or even Surtur to basically get those materials in a harvestable state much faster. They are a lot sturdier than most, and so you're going to need a lot of arts damage to kind of punch through and not just rely on oversaturating a resource node with enough drone hubs to make it a waste. Now, once all of the resources are on the ground, you're going to need a way to harvest them too. You're going to need operators with either good enough block count to take a lot of them with them at once and kind of juggle the cooldown there, or you're going to want to rely on the aforementioned fast redeploy operators to carry stuff back to base for you. So again, Agent Vanguards are still very good, so are Executor Specialists, but I also want to highlight some of the other fast redeploy operators that you might not think about immediately. The first of which will be the Merchant class. Since they are fast redeploy, they're pretty cheap to put out there. It's just that you won't want to keep them there unless you're actually using them for DPS, and generally speaking, unless you have them moduled up, they're going to be a drain on your DP, and we need more DP as the round progresses. So you don't want to be hampering your DP economy with your merchants out there for too long. Just send them out. If they have a plus block count, be sure to use that, but otherwise send them out, bring them back in before they cost you too much DP, and they can be an additional source of resource hauling for you that is very cooldown efficient. In terms of other pack mule picks, I want to make a special mention of 2-star Yato. Yes, she's relevant here because she has 2 block, but she also gets a bonus to her redeployment time cooldown of about 30 seconds, which quite frankly is pretty good. It's going to make her very efficient in hauling resources back to base, and again, she is just another melee unit, so if you need her to break a treasure chest or something, or a rewards bush, you can have her do that too in place of your other fast redeploy operators. In terms of other harvesting classes, you might be thinking, oh, what about Doll Keepers? They retreat, right? Unfortunately, this is not the case. They will still proc their retreat, of course, and their substitute will come in, but you will notice that they still have full resources when they respawn, quote unquote, so you're going to have to fully retreat them if you want their resources harvested. So sorry, Spectre Altar enjoyers, it's not going to be your day unless you're using Spectre Altar to deal a lot of damage on some wood or something. The last classes I want to make mention of here for resource maps are Defenders and Centurion Guards. The tutorial probably has you thinking, okay, well, we got Norkhorn for collecting resources, and while they are cooldown efficient in the sense that you've got 3 block and then the cooldown timer is kind of pretty average for most operators, I actually don't really like taking a lot of defenders for resource gathering missions. Because of their long cooldowns, it's not reasonable to kind of justify having them there when they're not really dishing out damage to help harvest things. Certain exceptions may apply, such as Blemishine, for example. She has 3 block, but she's also able to deal damage to the thing in front of her. Whereas most defenders, they will have just the self-attack range, and even if they do have an attack range that isn't just themselves, generally speaking, they're not going to be dealing as much damage as other classes, which brings me to the Centurion Guards. Centurion Guards have 3 block, just like Defenders, but their offensive stats are considerably more potent. So you can take stuff like Blaze, or maybe even Gavial Altar as well. You can use Gavial Altar skill 3 to increase her block count and take home even more resources, or you can use her skill 2 to have her chop down a whole bunch of trees and have your drones collect them afterwards. And, even Estelle is pretty good for this as well. So don't neglect your Centurion guards. I recommend fielding them in. Popcar is the sole exception, as she only gets 2 block, which is unfortunate, but she's not going to be as potent anyway. But hey, she does have a chainsaw, so you might as well take her lumberjacking, I guess. Now that's the gist for resource gathering in general. As usual, you'll want to scout the enemies beforehand and vary your team composition to be able to deal with those roaming patrols, whatever they might be fielding. So especially watch out for those enemies with reflect damage. You're going to be wanting something that, again, can heal themselves or have medic support in order to take out so that they don't disrupt your drone hubs, which are very, very important to protect. Your Vanguard choices will probably be the same. If you need a stronger start, feel free to take something like the Flagpipe combo, but honestly speaking, usually agents are very much good enough to get the job done in the first initial stages, and you should have enough DP to deploy most of your team and get most of the resources on any given map. And I say this even if you use like just one agent Vanguard. Again, Arknights is so well balanced that there is usually more than one solution to any given problem, and so it's up to you to look at your team and figure out where do I need to fill the hole to solve this problem, and maybe I'll build this operator next, but hold off on the others for now since I have some of those jobs covered. So now that you've got resources, you're ready to build a base, and you're ready to start taking out either raiding parties or some of the conflict zone nodes for whatever miscellaneous rewards that they have, or if you're progress gated. Let's talk standard defense missions. This is going to be more in line with your standard Arknights gameplay, with a few honorable mentions to stuff that you can pull off in Reclamation Algorithm as opposed to anywhere else. Again, we'll start with the basics. Let's talk Vanguards. Vanguards will be very important if you choose to hold out on a map that is not your base, especially when the spawns are closer to the protection objective. Every map has something different, so you're going to need to look out for, okay, does this map have close spawns? Do I need to take a more aggressive DP curve approach? Or can I get by with, taking maybe 2 pioneers and then calling it a day before deploying everybody else? When it comes to your base, in the initial stages, you'll definitely want some Vanguards, but in the later stages, you're going to have a good maze to kind of delay incoming enemies, so you won't necessarily need to have as many Vanguards, if at all, to set up your defenses against common raid waves. Now, the raids in Tales Within the Sand are kind of scaled to where you are in the campaign, and so the initial ones are going to be melee only, and this is really, really handy for kind of the initial defense. You're not going to have a lot of high ground tiles to work with. Roadblocks are probably not even in your wheelhouse yet, and so you're just going to have to kind of sit there and deal with it as a lot of different enemies pile into the protection objective in the center. Luckily, it's very tanky if you're doing base defense, so honestly, the base is kind of like the best place to hold out in the early game. It's just going to cost you a little bit of gold to repair, but if you have been prudent with checking for treasures in the resource and hunting maps, you should be able to cover those costs. And don't worry, we'll cover treasure hunting in a separate guide portion. All you need to know about that is if you see something that looks like a cracked rock that kind of looks off, try and send one of your melee operators to break it down and see if there's anything behind it. And generally there is, and you can also scout out what tiles are occupied by selecting a melee operator and seeing what tiles they can't be deployed on. I should have mentioned that in the resource portion, but it's still relevant here too, since defense missions can happen anywhere that you choose them to be. And also, there will be certain map nodes, now that I've played a little bit, there will be certain nodes that are technically defense missions, but will be happening elsewhere, and so you can still look for treasure when you're doing those maps. Now, in terms of strong base defenders, I was going to mention Angelina, because her S1 had a bug that enabled her regen passive on all base structures in Reclamation Algorithm, including the headquarters. This was very, very broken, but unfortunately they have fixed that bug, during the transition over from Fire Within the Sand to Tales Within the Sand. So unfortunately, no global regen passives will work to repair structures. You will have to repair them using gold now, which is a lot more convenient than having to spend resources on a repair bot and repeatedly deploying them. It doesn't really work out. Also, another thing about the base building that's nicer is that you can upgrade on the spot or craft on the spot new base blocks. So that's going to be really, really useful in generating the layouts that you want for your operators, which leads me to my point here is anything goes. Pick whatever it is that counters the enemy's defenses properly while keeping yours alive. That's basically the gist of it here. You can build whatever optimal layout you want in Reclamation Algorithm given enough time and resources. And so if you want to set up an Ifrit lane to choke out an enemy and just have them burn within the column, you can. There are a lot more new tiles to play with too in Tales Within the Sand, so you might get a lot more creative with your base layouts and operator deployments in terms of base defense. One of my favorites is actually stacking all 4 ambushers in a little loop that is, basically it's a 3x3 zone where you've got 2 blocks that the enemy goes around, and in those 8 tiles you just stack 4 different ambushers on there and then stack whatever AoE and a little bit of single target damage to help take out all of those there. And you can set this up right next to your HQ if you really wanted to, so that your HQ takes the damage if they manage to get past all of it. But no block knights is definitely a strategy for the melee waves. In terms of ranged attackers, you're definitely going to want someone to bait those ranged attacks once you have a proper base set up with, say, camouflaged barriers so that they're forced to funnel in to a certain point so that you can bait them. And then the rest of the base building is just going to come down to what you have to defend against. If you need to make a specific boss kill box or kind of make something wider so that your high ground tiles aren't damaged by splash damage, take that into consideration, and also make sure you leave room at the top of the base for all of your infrastructure. One last thing I'll mention about base defense missions in particular is that there's a few patches of natural high ground at the south end of the map. These are important because they can't be blown up by enemy units, so you can station high ground operators there safely. As such, when building your maze, I recommend routing around that area as your kill box so that you can have, like, say, a medic stationed on some safe high ground that won't get destroyed, so that your operators will be alive. Even if that medic gets taken out, you can redeploy immediately. Now, onto some operator recommendations for just some of the various situations that you might find yourself in. One is that we've got weather in Reclamation Algorithm, and one of those types of weather was acid rain, where you'll get corrosion damage being constantly dealt to you across the whole map, so that really, really sucks. You're going to be wanting to take the Wandering Medics for that one. Wandering Medics are a really good class in general because their attack range is huge and provide vision for that entire range, so definitely consider picking some up if you haven't already. Honeyberry should be free in the red certificate shop. I know it's not technically called that, but red certs. The red ticket shop should be able to provide you with a max pot Honeyberry, and she's a very solid unit in general and is very representative of the Wandering Medic class. You don't necessarily need an Ayafyala altar to get good mileage out of it. Honeyberry will carry you just fine in terms of what she does as a Wandering Medic. Another thing to point out is that the startup cost of vanguards can be mitigated even more with the right food. If you have 3 pieces of Lepori Beast meat, that's the meat that comes from the goats that looks like, round slices of ham. If you use the recipe for 3 of those will create a little piece of beef jerky, and it's been nerfed a little bit, but it's still very, very good. It reduces the cost of deploying by 6. So if you put it on, say, gravel, she has a cost of 6. She will have 0 cost for the entire mission, which is fantastic. And it also bears worth mentioning that even if it doesn't go all the way down to 0, the increased deployment costs for redeploying in the same mission is based off of the base cost when you first deploy them. So if you say deploy Cantabile and it costs 2 DP, you retreat her, you're going to realize that the cost to redeploy is still very, very cheap. It's going to be like around 3 or 4 DP as the mission progresses. So definitely keep an eye out for food combos such as that in order to maximize the effectiveness of your operators. Note that food is limited, but you are going to be able to farm food in the future with animal husbandry, so definitely be on the lookout for ways to secure meat supplies, because meats are usually the key to some of the higher tier food effects in Reclamation Algorithm, and you're definitely going to want to have some of those combos on your operators because they really just make life a whole lot easier, and you're going to be harvesting a lot more resources from maps with that. And they're also really, really good for taking down boss maps and boss monsters as well. As mentioned before, there are certain areas of the map with treasure chests that are hidden at first. You're going to have to find cracked rocks to break down. They basically look a little bit different from like the normal cracked rocks of the background, and you have to deploy a melee operator right next to them. So again, Executor, fast redeploy operators, agents, those are also really good at busting them down. You can even use charger vanguards like Bagpipe if you really want to. It is very well worth it to start learning those locations as soon as you can, whether you look them up on the wiki or just try to trial and error it yourself. Sometimes they are determined by RNG, they might not always be in the same spot, but definitely seek them out. Treasure chests are usually worth 50 gold apiece, and that starts adding up pretty quickly, and soon you'll get to the point where you can basically buy out the shop whenever you need to. This was the case in Fire Within the Sand when the shop was very much busted and you could save your gold between runs. So what would happen is you just kind of go on a treasure hunt for one run and then just bankroll your next run with all the food that you could ever want in the world, all the materials and all the resources, and you would just go ham. This is not the case here, since this is much more of a persistent game mode, but this might change as my impressions go forward. There are some other parts of the mode that I haven't explored yet, so this might become a little bit more relevant as time goes on, but you do have to upgrade the shop's availability with tech tree points. So bear that in mind. Gold won't solve all of your problems, but it might get you out of a pinch. So with that, I'm going to leave it there. I've covered a pretty good amount of the core gameplay loop that was kind of preserved from Fire Within the Sand, and a lot of it is still relevant here, but obviously now we have new areas to explore, and we have yet to get into content past the first few days. But this should get you started and well on your way towards having a good run in Reclamation Algorithm. As we said before, this is a long-term progression event, and to really get into the meat of things, you're going to have to sink some time into it time and again here. But thankfully, I think they're pretty somewhat generous with the rewards this time around, and you can always just reset the run and respec your tech tree into other nodes if you want to experiment with however many things you want. Also reload your saves. The game does save every 3 days, and you can reload your last save or the save before that if you think that taking a different course of action would be more efficient, or if you just want to mulligan something that just kind of didn't go your way. I think this is a fair change to make because this iteration of Reclamation Algorithm is a lot more permanent. And as a result, if you're not happy with things, it really sucks to start over fresh. So having those save points and kind of labbing things out is really, really crucial to get the most out of your time with your runs. All that being said, you won't lose your accumulated rewards currency or tech tree points if you have to full reset. This will only just make it so that your tech tree is uninvested and you can respec it into whatever you want at the expense of losing everything in your base and so on and so forth. So again, don't be afraid to get your feet wet and see how far you can get. This is meant to be a late game challenge, and don't be afraid to use some underhanded tactics, but there is a game here and it is worth playing, and I fully believe that. So with that said, thank you so much for watching. I really hope that I can get through more of the mid-game and late-game progression on stream in the coming days. So if that interests you, again, I have a Twitch, twitch.tv/Dr. Socrates. And if you want to leave me a question to answer, feel free to drop a comment down below or send me a message on Twitch when I'm streaming. Outside of stream, you can also try to find me on Twitter and co-host. I don't post to Twitter as much, just on a moral basis, but I will reply to you if you tweet me directly. And on co-host, I also have an anonymous ask box as well, so you can just leave it there, and I'll either answer it on my co-host page or try to include it in the next video that I make. So, with all that being said, thank you so much for watching. Good luck with your runs out there, and I really hope this is the first step to getting some actual guidance on what to do in this game mode rather than just farming the points and being done with it. This game mode has so much work and thought put into it, and there's a lot of good story and lore bits that you're going to miss out on if you don't experience it. So RA really just doesn't deserve that, and I think you can get a lot farther than you probably think when you just have the right guidance. And so here's hoping I find all of you guys out there in the sands.